Welcome to the online training session on the topic of pesticide management, Part 1. This is the fifth topic within Principle 3, Natural Resource Conservation of the Sustainable Agriculture Standard. In this session, you will learn different ways to protect the environment from pesticides. When you apply chemicals, you need to ensure that the following elements are always protected: workers' health, natural ecosystems such as rivers, springs, and forests, areas of human activity such as schools, houses, and public roads, pollinators such as bees and hummingbirds, and communities. Let's go through the criteria that address each of these elements. Critical Criterion 4.15 addresses the issue of protection of workers who handle chemicals. Criterion C 3.27 talks about ways to protect natural ecosystems from pesticides. Criterion C 3.28 is about ways to protect areas of human activities from pesticides. Criterion C 3.32 addresses the issue of protection of pollinators. Criterion C 3.29 talks about the protection of communities. How can we protect each one of them? In this session, we will go through the following methods and techniques to protect the environment from negative impacts of pesticides. Let us go through them first to create an overview of the session. First, you need to respect the SAN list of prohibited pesticides. Certain chemicals are so toxic that they should never be used. This is under Critical Criteria 3.4. Then, you need to respect the SAN list of pesticides for use with risk mitigation, which is in Criteria 3.27 and 3.29. These chemicals are allowed for use, but you need to take a series of measures to mitigate their risks to aquatic life, wildlife, and pollinators. One of the measures is to establish SAN non-application zones. Another measure is to establish vegetative barriers. You can also try to reduce spray drift. If you conduct aerial fumigation, you need to respect the SAN requirements for aerial fumigation. To protect workers' health, use of personal protective equipment is extremely important. In this session, we will cover all of the above-mentioned criteria in detail, except for Critical Criterion 4.15, which will be covered in the module on occupational health and safety. First, let us look into Critical Criterion 3.4, which talks about the SAN list of prohibited pesticides. The list looks like this and is 6 pages in total. The prohibited active ingredients are listed in alphabetical order. Let us see one example. Gramoxone is a contact herbicide, and its label says that the active ingredient is paraquat. In the list, you look for the active ingredients starting with P. Then you find that paraquat is included in the list. Therefore, gramoxone cannot be allowed for use. This criterion also refers to agriculture mineral oil. Some mineral oil contains dimethyl sulfoxide, which is carcinogenic. Therefore, its content needs to be less than 3%. If you are using a mineral oil, you can check whether it can be allowed for use or not in the following manner. First, you go to the link of Chem Index shown on the screen. Type in the name of the mineral oil. Then, the CAS numbers will appear. You need to check whether the CAS number of the product you intend to use is not in the list of CAS numbers of mineral oils that cannot be used. These numbers can be found in the guide for the standard. Let us do one quick quiz on this criterion. Roundup Extend with Vapor Grip is a new herbicide which is not yet registered for crop use in the United States. Its active ingredient is glyphosate, which is not in the SAN list of prohibited pesticides. Can a producer apply this herbicide? The answer is no. Even if a product is not on the prohibited list, if the product is not legally registered in the production country, it cannot be used. The legal registration is the first important condition for use. Now, let us move on to another list from the SAN. Criterion C3.27 talks about the SAN list of pesticides for use with risk mitigation. It includes active ingredients that can be applied, but under strict management. The list looks like this and indicates risks to aquatic life, wildlife, and to pollinators. What do you have to do if an active ingredient is on the list? One management technique is to establish non-application zones. According to the SAN, when a knapsack sprayer or other hand-assisted application method is used, the width of the non-application zone around should be at least 5 meters. When a chemical is applied by motorized sprayers or other pressurized application machines, the width of the non-application zone needs to be at least 10 meters. Another management technique is to establish vegetative barriers. The SAN has established specific parameters for vegetative barriers. They need to be as high as the crop height, or they need to be as high as the equipment's application valve, whichever is higher. They need to be with foliage all year. They should be preferably native species. Another technique is reduction of spray drift. For example, if you apply chemicals on a very windy day, the wind will blow the chemicals to the areas that are not supposed to be sprayed. You should avoid spraying when it is windy, hot, or dry. You need to adjust the drop size, nozzle pressure, and flow rates to ensure that the chemicals are applied only to the target area and to reduce drifts to the other areas. There are special considerations for pollinators. The SAN list of pesticide for use with risk mitigation contains 4 active ingredients that pose risks to pollinators. They are clothianidin, imidacloprid, thiamethoxam, and phenylpriazolfipronil. When these chemicals are used, the population of pollinators, such as bees, decline drastically and cause serious impacts to the environment. Use of such chemicals needs to be with extra caution and under strict management. To protect pollinators, criterion C3.29 puts the following conditions for the use of neonicotinoids and fipronil. Only when other options of a less toxic chemical is not available, complying with SAN non-application zone, or establishing vegetative barriers according to the SAN parameters, or implementing mechanisms to reduce spray drift. Application is allowed only when pollinators are not active, or Chemicals should not be applied to flowering weeds. Application should not be during the crop's peak flowing period. Beehives are covered during application. Bees are provided with clean water sources outside the application area. Criterion C 3.32 talks about protection of communities from chemicals. Look at this photo. The mother and schoolboys were not told that the chemical application was going on at the farm on that day, and they needed to pass through the road right next to the application areas. This should never happen to the people in the community. In order to protect the communities, first you need to identify those people who can potentially be affected by pesticide applications. Then you alert them or warn them in advance about the applications. You need to restrict the entry to the application areas to avoid contamination. One of the chemical application methods that has often affected the communities and the environment is aerial fumigation. When it is not conducted with caution, it can cause a great scale of spray drift, affecting people's health, water sources, and wildlife. The SAN has established requirements for aerial fumigation under Critical Criterion 3.5. It includes many conditions that you will need to meet in order to conduct aerial fumigation. First, there cannot be any worker or person present in the field. Non-application zones of 30 meters need to be established next to public roads and housing areas. Non-application zones of 15 meters need to be established from riverbanks. The vegetative barriers need to be higher than crop height. The aircraft should be equipped with GPS. The flight altitude should not be higher than 5 meters above the crop canopy. Calibration is conducted every 6 months. Functions of the aircraft are checked before and after each flight. The wind speed needs to be less than 10 kilometers per hour. The temperature needs to be less than 29 degrees Celsius. Let's confirm your understanding of the session through quizzes. Here is the first quiz. Last year, a tea producer planted a native species as vegetative barriers between the public road and the farm to protect the passers-by. Is this compliant to the SAN parameters for vegetative barriers? The answer is no. According to SAN's parameters for vegetative barriers, they have to be as high as the crop height. These plants were planted just last year, and their height is still lower than the tea. Therefore, it still does not meet the parameters. Until the plants grow and the parameters can be met, the farm needs to protect the public roads with other means, such as establishing non-application zones or using techniques to reduce spray drift. Next quiz. A banana farmer sprays chlorpyrifos using a boom sprayer. He says that he respects a non-application zone of 5 meters between the farm and the neighboring forest. Is this compliant to the criterion? The answer is no. If you look through the SAN list of pesticides for use with risk mitigation, you find chlorpyrifos. Therefore, the requirements on the criterion C 3.27 need to be respected. In this case, the farm established a non-application zone of 5 meters. However, the farm is using a boom sprayer. The SAN non-application zone needs to be 10 meters or wider if chemicals are applied with a boom sprayer. Therefore, 5 meters distance is not sufficient. Next one. A worker at a tea farm is spraying dimethoate with a knapsack. He says that he is not allowed to spray beyond the sign saying buffer zone. The distance between the sign and the public road is 5 meters. Is this compliant with the criterion? The answer is yes. Dimethoate is another chemical listed in the SAN list of pesticides for use with risk mitigation. The worker is using a knapsack sprayer, so the SAN non-application zone needs to be 5 meters or wider. In this case, the farm has established 5 meters of non-application zone, so this is acceptable. Last quiz. A pineapple farmer has established vegetative barriers that are higher than the crop height. However, he sprays cypermethrin to all areas of his farm, right up to the vegetative barriers. Is this compliant to the criterion? The answer is yes. Cypermethrin is on the SAN list of pesticides for use with risk mitigation. Criterion C3.27 requires that the farm establish vegetative barriers or establish non-application zones or use techniques to reduce spray drift. It does not require a farm to conduct all of them at the same time. In this case, the farm has not established non-application zones, but it has established effective vegetative barriers that meet the SAN parameters for vegetative barriers, so it is sufficient to meet criterion C3.27. By implementing these good practices of pesticide management, let us protect the natural ecosystems, areas of human activity, pollinators, and the community.